Hello and welcome to the podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the organisation that's been the face of communal living in Britain since the 1980s. Whatever kind of intentional community you're interested in, whether it's communes, co-ops, co-housing or anything else, Diggers and Dreamers is where you begin. And now, here's our podcast host, Kirsten Stevens-Wood.
In today's Diggers and Dreamers podcast, we welcome Simon Tilley, founder member of Hockerton Housing Project in Nottinghamshire. Simon takes us through the journey of the early days when Hockerton was simply a plan set out on paper by a group of optimists, through to the realisation of what would begin with 5 earth-sheltered houses based on low-impact sustainable principles. We discuss the amazing performance of these houses and the potential to reduce energy consumption by up to 90%. Join us to listen to the inspirational story of Hockerton Housing Project as it has developed over the last 30 years. Hello and welcome to the Diggers and Dreamers podcast. Today we are welcoming Simon Tilley, who is joining us from Hockerton Housing. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning. Morning.
Hi.
Yeah, it's good to meet
I'm
you.
wondering if you could start us off by just, introduce yourself, tell us a bit about who you are and maybe how you're linked or what your history is with Hockerton.
Okay, Kirsten, that's great. Yeah, so I'm one of the founding members with my wife Helena, and we headed out to Namibia working with VSO, and we came back from there really thinking about what sustainable development might look like. And we were very conscious of the fact that quite a lot of what was happening in Namibia was driven by sort of osmosis, almost just pulling in fact, most of our bad habits. And we wanted to come back and realize that development actually looked like getting things better here. And we sketched out in our mind an image of what the house might be like that we live with and the community that it might sit in, and how we could, what we could aspire to, I suppose. And we generated that idea and those images in our mind and just found this group by chance, which was at its kind of embryonic stage, very much on a little table in a fair thing, and a few people standing around it saying, look, this is what we want to do. We want to build these earth sheltered houses with no heating and make them autonomous. And I'm sure you'd love to come along. It'd be great. And we looked at that and compared it to our mental map of what we'd created. And they were so aligned that we thought, OK. And so we came and joined. I mean, there was a little bit more to it than that. But we joined the group before we built anything or set anything up sort of legally or whatnot. And that was back in 1995. And we had Luke then, our son, and we subsequently had Naomi and Flo when we were living in the caravan building the houses.
Oh my gosh.
That's critical to understand. You have to keep warm when you're living in a caravan, and the consequences can be more than you imagine. So we ended up with 3 children, which meant the design of our house didn't really work because we'd only catered for 2. But Flo's okay about that. It was a wonderful opportunity for us because this group had started and already sketched out the plans and had got these ideas put down in a model and on paper.
Really interesting that you'd kind of come back, Theo. Was there anything that triggered that thinking, that you brought back with you after your time doing voluntary services overseas?
So what got me when we were there was we were working in northern Namibia where half the population lived, and the government classified that population as being out of work and unemployed because they didn't submit any tax returns, basically. So all that population was off the financial map. But in fact, where we were working, everybody was completely sustainable. That's how, 1.5 million people managed to live from year to year, was because they were sustainable. Mm-hmm. And, they grew all their own food and they had all their own water sources and they lived and loved and were happy and sad, and but they didn't. There wasn't a load of money changing hands, and there certainly weren't any tax returns. But because all that labour and work was not, in inverted commas, valued by the government, it was, they're all unemployed. We must develop them. And of course, we were part of that. We were, as voluntary service overseas is about sort of transferring skills and development in its broadest terms. And it just didn't add up to me. We were, and we needed to be copying them. Not learning their skills.
Right. Different ways of measuring what we now call productivity.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Efficiency is a very tricky subject to deal with, and their sustainability was incredibly high, and we needed to learn. But it's a two-way street, and what was going in and out happens, and I'm not saying everybody mustn't have a fridge. Most people didn't have a fridge, and a fridge is a wonderful thing, and you can store food and have a healthier diet. But to do a fridge, you need electricity, you need to be able to buy a fridge, you need the money to buy it. And then, you've got to, how's all that going to happen? And so that's where I think we came back trying to solve that problem here. So you could have development, but not unsustainable development. What does that look like? And that was really what this group was about. We're kind of, in the way of things here, we're kind of middle ground in some ways. We're not a village where people don't know each other. We know each other and we get on with each other, but we're not very, very basic. We're not living in a yurt with no water supply, as I know, and maybe actually that is the solution, but we're kind of bricks and mortar, electricity and fridges and modern comforts, but trying to do it in a way that is as low impact as possible. And one of our objective is to get people to say, I could fairly easily do that. I could copy you. That would be okay. And then we might end up being a whole lot more sustainable.
So you came back with all these kind of ideas, but also this kind of like, we can live in a more sustainable way, and met this other group. And you say that was 1995. I mean, gosh, these ideas, the word sustainable development has been washing around for a while, but you must have been quite early thinkers on that in terms of
Yes.
Building in Britain.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we were having to educate the council a lot on, we want to build these sustainable houses, about what sustainable meant. And we've got we submitted in the end a Section 106 agreement, which is a legal contract with the council on what we were going to do apart from just put the bricks and the mortar together. Not the planning permission for houses is one thing, but we put in this 106, which is about kind of the legal stuff.
So you said that you were educating the council. How did you start that conversation?
Well, we started by submitting the planning application, but then we went into. They quickly realised we had a mole almost in the council, David Pickles, who helped us along, and he was the chief architect, very keen on sustainable development. And we got into this conversation with this Section 106 agreement, which is about all the things that we do other than the bricks and the mortar. So growing things organically, trying to be autonomous, so energy systems, water systems that meet our needs, and sort of showing that we'd be a community and setting up a cooperative to manage the site, and lots of nitty gritty stuff, I suppose, that we showed that we weren't just going to get planning permission and then go, no, actually we meant we're going to build a supermarket. We're going to plan permission, and we are going to do that, and we're going to try and make it a real place, which is a community, and trying to be sustainable and trying to define that. And so, yes, that wasn't in the planning department's lexicon hardly at all at that point.
So for anybody who perhaps has never seen Hockerton, Could you describe the site, maybe, sort of what does that include?
Well, when we started, it was literally just a field with a very thin hedge around the outside. And what's interesting about that is I think any field you could build a Hockerton on. So we didn't go looking for a field that was facing the right way or doing the right things in terms of we had a field, and I can explain how that happened later, but the field was there and we created what we needed and thought about the resources, and we have now got 5 earth sheltered houses in a terrace. So it's quite a wacky description, because if you in planning speak, that's a terrace of 5 earth sheltered bungalows, which I always think is rather nice, thinking we live in a earth sheltered bungalow. The houses face south, capturing lots of sunshine. So they're very light, although they're earth sheltered. So you say you live underground and people think hole in the ground, dark and dingy. In fact, hole in not really hole, but earth sheltered and lots of sun coming in and very light and airy, and set in a site that we manage and grow food, and so chickens, sheep, vegetables, and have water catchment on the fields to meet our water needs, a large lake, keeping fish, and we keep bees, and so all sort of those different aspects in one place. And of course we've planted loads of trees and they've all grown. Now some of them are about 26 meters tall, so it's a
Fantastic.
it's a very nice place to be, as well as very hard work, because growing
what
stuff.
size is your site? If you say, is it just the 5 houses?
So on the bit we manage the 5 houses here, yes, just the 5, but it has nearby and adjacent to, there were first 2 shelter houses in their own little plot, and then subsequently there were 5 more terraced houses built, which to the same standards of energy efficiency. And then there's been several more bungalows built after that. So we've now kind of a little corner in the village where there's loads of very low impact, low energy houses.
So you say that you had David Pickles. He sounds like everybody should have one of him.
Yes.
Inside the council, sort of championing your build. Did you get much resistance? Did people, because earth sheltering is not a common thing in this country?
Yes, it was amazing, really, that it got through. I think it was persistence. I mean, it took us quite a long time. It was a year and a half of doing that bit. You get to the design and the process of, in your mind, it's almost done. You've drawn it, you've created it, and then you go to the planners and say, look, a wonderful thing, can we get going? And then a year and a half later, after many toing and froings, you get to start to build. So there's that, warn everybody that's thinking about doing this, don't expect to rush in there and be there on when you want to be. There's a lot of hurdles, but so it took a long time, but it was what we wanted, I think. But there were, on the way, we had to make compromises. So one compromise was, I wouldn't put the planning application in with that wind turbine there, because if you do, that'll scupper the whole thing. So we extracted the wind turbine from the house planning application, and then did that subsequently, and that's another story, as they say. That's another 5 years down the road.
I see. So they can rise and fall in their own right. So you can get planning permission for the housing, and the turbine can or can't get that separately.
Exactly. And that turbine, that was a battle. That was 5 years, 4 planning applications, 3 appeals, and a considerable amount of argy-bargy from a very few people, but very loud people in the village. So that sort of was a big effort.
So in terms of sustainability, and we talked about your starting point here. How well do you feel that Hockerton met those original ideals? How sustainable would you say Hockerton has become?
Well, very in some senses. So, our original targets for energy use in the houses we have met, almost exceeded. I mean, they are incredibly low energy using houses. And key in that is the heat. And, so we generate our heat sustainably from passively, so from the sun mostly. There are a few other bits and pieces, but mostly, and that is the cheapest, the easiest way to become lower energy use is focusing on the heat. We often hear about electricity, and which is great. We need to make electricity green as well. And when I talk to people and say, well, how much energy, not electricity, but if I say energy, people assume electricity, but how much energy is produced in this country? And typically people say, I think it's about 40 or maybe even 50% of our energy comes from renewables, which is true for electricity. And people often talk about that. And it's great. We've gone from very low to very high. Nearly 50% of our electrical energy comes from renewables, which is fantastic. But how much comes from how much renewable energy compared to our total energy use? Very few people know what that is. And even in Dukes, the government's national statistics, percentage of electricity on the front page, nearly 50%. Percentage of renewables of total energy, about, chapter 14, appendix 3, line 256, it's completely buried. How much? Well, they say 16%.
Oh my gosh. So how would you say that Hockerton compares to in terms of energy? You're saying it's very, very low. Tell us how you achieve that.
So my house, which is a 3-bedroomed house, uses total energy consumption is about 8 to 10 kilowatt hours a day. A typical house, so my mother's house, who she lives on her own now, uses about 80 kilowatt hours a day. So that gives you an idea of the reduction. And most of that reduction is excluding the need for heat. So, no, that's not quite how I should phrase it. We're warm, we have heat, but excluding the need for burning fossil fuels to create it. So we don't have a gas boiler or a heat pump. We have passive ways of keeping the house warm. The design feature which enabled us to achieve that is in some ways similar to Passive House with a capital P, the very successful German franchise of passive houses. So ours works in some ways quite similarly to those. So we capture sunlight, basically. We get sun to come into the building. But we also use body heat. That's 25% of our heating needs, and incidental gains, I think you described them as, which would be like from your light bulb, you get some heat. That's another 25%. The trick, though, why we're different, if you like, is that we have a way of storing that heat. So most of the sunshine we get, or daylight hours, let's say, are in the summer, being where we are in the world. So, and as we all notice, in the winter, the days get shorter and the nights get longer. So using the sunshine to keep your house warm has a bit of an issue there. And how we've resolved that is storage. And storage is, most of the time we have spent on this planet, we have been thinking about food storage, our direct energy supply. And storage is really critical for keeping houses warm in the winter for us. So we store heat from the summer and release it in the winter. And that enables us to really minimize on our total energy consumption.
So visually, your row of earth-sheltered bungalows have got a almost like a sort of a lean-to greenhouse, glass fronted. So you're saying that you take that solar energy and store it, you store it in the earth? You store it in batteries? How does that work?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? So people have tried different ways. Bill Dunster did it with water, but we
Mm.
have done it with actually basically the fabric of the building. So the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. And so if you imagine this, so yes, we've got a very large amount of glazing on the south side of the building. And internally, we've got effectively, I suppose you describe as a concrete box with a continuous insulated layer around that box and then earth around that. So the earth actually it is neither an insulator nor a thermal store. It's more a covering to hide the building. It does help protect the building from the elements, so the wind, the rain, and so on. But the way the buildings work thermally is this concrete on the inside of the installation heats up in the summer and then cools down in the winter. And that cooling process, heat is released from the concrete. And where does it go? Well, it can't go outwards because of all the insulation. So it comes inwards into the room and keeps the air at a very, very stable temperature. So we do have heat swings, but what we're talking about is in the summer we're at 23 or 24 degrees, and then in the winter, very slowly from sort of August time, it very gently drops from that 24 down to February, middle of February, more or less, is our coldest point, and that will be about 18 degrees, and then it very slowly comes back up again. So we have this cycle which is driven by mostly the change in the day length.
Have you noticed over the last sort of, 25 years, any shifts in that with as climate has changed? Obviously, we've had some quite hot summers recently, and milder winters, actually. Do you keep those sorts of records?
We do keep records, but it's the peaks and the troughs that are interesting. So that about, was it 2023, 22? I can't remember, where we had a really high heat wave, didn't we? Up in the 40s. Yeah. And you see, these houses work the other way around too. They keep cool. So I think the earth might help us keep cool, interestingly, but because there's some evaporation and whatnot. But the houses didn't. So in our kitchen, when it was the hottest day, I think it was 40, just above 40 outside. In our kitchen, we were between 25 and 26, and we were using the oven and were cooking. And in the bedroom, it was 23. So we had no excess heat really from that peak load outside. And that's for several reasons. One, the mass absorbs the heat. So temperature is different from heat. And to imagine that, I think about it as little vibrating molecules. So when temperature is high, the molecules are vibrating a lot and moving a lot. But and the more they move, the more energy. But if you have a lot of things that are moving, you only have to move each one a little bit to get the same amount of energy in. So the analogy, if you think about that with air is a gas and has very little. I'll stop there. Stop the telephone ringing.
I'm sure for some people will be very sad that you will have stopped there, but there's quite a lot of detail. It is interesting though, because of course there's climate shifting, and there is more talk now about protecting houses not only from cold but also from the other extremes, which is heat. So it's fascinating that your setup seems to be showing some resilience to that as well. I was wondering if we could maybe talk about you as a community as well as a sustainable build. Am I right in I think I was reading somewhere that you did set up as a cooperative fairly early on?
We did, yeah. So we set up two, in fact. So we set up one to manage the houses and one as a trading enterprise. So although we wanted to be autonomous as much as we could, so autonomous, saying water is easy to understand. You catch your own water, you drink it, and then you clean it up and put it back on site. So you do all of that yourself. we, with food, we wanted to grow as much as we could, but not all of it. And we understood, in fact, that we would have surpluses sometimes, and we wanted to trade. So we didn't want to be isolationist. We wanted to connect with the wider community. And that is why we set up this other co-op, which was the Hockerton Housing Project trading cooperative. So basically, that's got the same people in it, more or less. It's a cooperative that, as it says in its name, does the trading. So we run tours and people pay to come on a tour, and we talk about sustainability and how we built the houses or how we work as a community. Lots of different topics we cover in those, and people pay us, and we give them that information, or we do things like Tai Chi courses, and we do advise people on building houses and things like that. So that's the to and fro with the more outside world, if you like, in terms of the financial stuff, and that's facilitated by the trading company.
And how do you work together? Because you've got shared resources. So although you all have independent housing, you've got your own front door. You share quite a lot of land and resources. So you've got, as you say, you've got your water recycling and everything else. So how is that shared? How do you manage that as a community?
Well, over time, we've come up with multiple different ways. It's awfully confusing for new people, but it feels appropriate to have different ways of doing it for different things. So, say for the water systems, we have a rota where we allocate a couple of people choose to do the changing of the filters and making sure the gutters are clear and things like that. And we try and share those tasks out evenly. And we manage that separately from, say, growing food. So we have a different system for growing food, and we have a different system yet again for the trading business. And so that we have a sort of very patchwork, very multi different ways of doing things like that, where we manage our shared resources. And I think that's really important. I think it's the key thing. We learned from some of the autonomous services to manage the common. The commons are so important for community. We had the Enclosures Act a long time ago, and that stopped all that happening. And that's a real shame, because actually communities value and benefit from commons. So, water is a common asset, really, and we manage that ourselves. But we haven't got one water tank each. We have a water tank that supplies 5 houses. That's why it becomes a common, and we have to manage that and look after it. And we manage it, there's highly motivated whoever's doing that, because that water goes to your tap as well as to the other 4 people's taps. And they're all your neighbours. And so, you're motivated to change the filter because actually you need clean drinking water. And the benefit is the neighbours get clean drinking water, but they don't have to change the filter. You've done it. So, but the motivation is there. So that common asset is always, I think, helped generate the community. And then when you've done that once, you think, oh, well, maybe we could put up a wind turbine. We could share that. Turn up. And then, that's much more efficient if you share the putting up of a wind turbine in a community. So, in that case, we put up one. We shared it between 5 households, and then later on, about 10 years ago, we put up another one which we share between 80 households. But that's kind of village-owned turbine, and the benefits are shared amongst those. So you do these little things like sharing water, and then you find you can do the bigger things and the bigger things. So that the common assets are really important for enabling that community. And community knowledge and community trust to build and sort of gain experience and think, oh, maybe we could do some more like that.
And would you say so, in terms of resilience? I mean, I think it was quite interesting that there's been a kind of, or maybe it's just me, but it seems like there's a growing level of anxiety over our ability as a country to meet our own needs, in terms of food resilience, energy resilience. Obviously, at the time of recording right now, we've got the political and unrest that's going on between the US and the Middle East, and there is discussions about whether or not the UK as an island is capable of meeting its own needs, feeding itself. Do you see yourselves as a model or an example of something that people might be able to replicate?
Yeah, I think that's changed. That is one of the changes that I've seen. So to begin with, when we were running tours, people were quite often coming saying, "Oh, you're living underground. What's that? Oh, that's interesting. Crikey. And what? You haven't got any heating? And what? And now it is, well, we want to do this, and how have you done it? And oh, that's interesting. Can we, there are a lot more people trying to be, as you say, I think, more resilient. And I think whether that's because we're in our own bubble and we meet the people that are like us and are thinking the same way, or there's just more of them, which I think is possibly the case, which is good. I've certainly been promoting that over a long time, and I think there are more ears listening, and there's more, there are more people trying to be more resilient, and which is a really good thing. And it's almost another way of saying sustainability, isn't it?
That's really interesting. I'm wondering over the last sort of 25 years, whether there have been any sort of big lessons that Hockerton has learned over that time, or any kind of, I don't know, stumbling points that you've managed to overcome in the years.
Yeah. So lots really. There's a few positive ones and a few negative ones. The positive ones being that the way the houses function thermally works. We've had extremely low energy use for many years, so we can definitely demonstrate and know that that's a working thing, which is, this is really good. I don't think we've managed to replicate the houses as much as we'd hoped. You would have thought, having built at no extra cost compared to a typical house, because we did monitor that when we were building, that these would have been taken up, but we've had 25 years or more of house building that's been very much business as usual, and not copied us and built a whole load of houses that still need heating and that still have very high bills, and it's very frustrating that that's happened. And I think the learning point there is we didn't manage to sell the idea well enough somehow, or I don't know, the zeitgeist wasn't there. But it's very difficult to break into the building business as usual sort of monopolies that the big builders have, and get them to change their behaviour. It's a slow old thing changing that. I mean, there's a few things. So on the technology front, we've tried to keep as much tech out, which was a good idea. The tech that we did use, the one was heat pumps, and at about year 10 to year 12, by then all the heat pumps had broken and none of them were replaced, because we found a better way to do it. So we are very dubious of heat pumps.
So you started out with heat pumps, but they haven't survived.
No. So we started out with a heat pump in each house for the hot water supply. So we don't need it for space heating, but we still use hot water, and we used heat pumps to generate the hot water. But it turns out they're quite expensive, and I'm a mechanical engineer, and when you look inside, you rub your hands and go, wow, look at all those pipes, compressors, electrical components, things getting hot, things getting cold. It's great for mechanical engineers, but rubbish for long-term maintenance. There's lots of things to go wrong. Things will go wrong because it gets hot, it gets cold, it starts, it stops, and they became a problem, and they're expensive to buy because of all that complexity, really. And so we no longer, I mean, I can go into what we do differently, but fundamentally now, I mean, we never needed them for the space heating. And now, because the building regs have improved a lot recently in June 2025, and basically if you add a little bit more effort to those, and it is really only a little bit, if you're putting in a heat pump, you just basically haven't put enough insulation in. Put it simply. And so, they could save a whole load of money but the government pushes for heat pumps and it generates employment and there's grants and whatnot. But actually, you should be doing it more simply. You should be building houses that are passive, no maintenance, no running costs apart from letting the sunshine in. Got to clean your windows.
As you say, the building, the entire building process, all the way through from the massive builders, the companies that build thousands and thousands of houses, and then all of the infrastructure that follows that, the breeze blocks and the all of that. It's kind of like this path dependency. Everybody's geared into feeding this one way of building, and to shift away from that the
supply chain is very, very strong.
It's an enormous shift, one that we obviously need to make, but the powers that be and the vested interests are probably getting in the way of that quite significantly.
And I wouldn't underestimate the challenge there, because making things simpler is much more difficult than making them more complicated for us. Engineers love heat pumps. And he's saying, oh no, you don't need a heat pump, you can leave it out, you can just do it simply. That's pushing the boundaries. and just psychologically that's really difficult.
So how do you if your heat pumps were originally heating your water, what's the next iteration for that?
Well, some time ago I was working with a student from the university here, and I had an idea that I could see solar panel prices, so photovoltaic panel prices, coming down dramatically. And my thought was that actually, if we use those to directly heat water with an immersion heater, that thing that nearly everybody's got in their hot tank, which is just a resistance wire, if you could use the energy from those PV panels to heat the water, that's still using the sunshine like a heat pump. The heat pump uses air which has been warmed by the sunshine. This is using the photons to make electrons in the panels, so using the sunshine to make electricity to make hot water. That might be a whole load simpler, and simpler because wires are much easier to maintain than pipes with hot water or cold water in. Pipes with water in freeze, the joints leak, you're trying to get. And fundamentally, the other thing that struck me, the basis of using, say, solar thermal panels, which is where you have a radiator on the outside full of water and you bring the water into your hot tank, and that's a typical classical hot water heating system. The difficulty is physics, because you can only get energy to flow from a hot place to a cold place. So if you've got a hot water tank sitting at 65 degrees, say, that means you've got to get the hot water in the radiator on the outside of your house above that before the energy will flow. You can get the water to flow, but you've got to get the heat to flow into the tank. And that so the efficiency of the panel is really good, but the efficiency of the system is actually pretty low. And quite often, sadly, in practice, it runs backwards sometimes. So the hot tank is hotter than the panel, and if you haven't got your valves right, you start heating up.
Returning the heat.
you send the hot water in your tank up to the panel and heat the outside world. Not good. So the idea with electricity is that the immersion heater sits in the tank at 65 degrees, but the electrons flow around it and will always add heat because it's a different process. You're creating the resistance of the wire, then generates the heat into the tank. So even on a cold day in winter, you can and in fact, solar PV panels, should I say, are more efficient when the temperature is lower, unlike solar panels, solar thermal panels. So so this system is a new system. We've called it the Sun Hopper, and we've developed it with Mitch. And as a student, he's gone on to set up a company and develop this product called the Sun Hopper, which is basically a system to use solar photovoltaic panels to heat your hot water.
Fantastic. We'll probably put a link for that at the bottom of the podcast.
Yeah,
so as a community, we're sort of coming towards the end now, and I wanted to ask you a couple of things. One is how you make all of these decisions. Like, how do you continue as a community to think about the future of Hockerton and where you'll go, and how you make those decisions? And then I suppose also just wrapping up at the end, thinking about any lessons that you would say, would be things that you'd like to pass on to anyone who was listening.
So meeting is the simple answer to how we make decisions. Regular meetings. So we still, right from the early days, we met once a week. We now meet either twice a month or 3 times a month. Usually either on a Thursday evening or a Friday evening, or sometimes in the day. And those are usually more for the business side of things. But just getting together. And we do other types of meetings, like we walk around. So we have a walking meeting around the site and make notes as we go. And we have meetings on specific subjects like, we need to buy some seeds. What do we need? Who's going to grow what, that kind of very targeted meeting. But just regular meeting, and we have an agenda, and we work through what we've done, what we want to do, and recap and try and make decisions that way. And there's various formal written down procedures as to, in theory, this is how we make the meeting, how we make decisions, and what do you do if there's conflict and all those kind of things. But actually the reality is getting together
and spending time.
Spending time and talking to each other.
That's interesting that you talk about meetings, because a lot of the communities that we speak to, that is very much a core to keeping people together, is the meeting, and in fact eating together, that kind of meeting and eating, even if it's potluck dinners or that regular discourse that takes place. I'd imagine that that's been very helpful over the years.
Yeah, we don't actually eat together that often. So we do on higher days and holidays, as it were, but we don't regularly eat together, interestingly. And I've noticed that as a difference as well. And I think we have very contained houses, are very separate. It's your own front garden, your own back garden, your own house. Everything in it is separate, until you sort of walk into the outer space where that's joined up again. So and obviously the water supply and so on.
So it has some similarities with some of the co-housing, obviously without the co-house, as it were, but that idea of having your own front door, having your own private space that you can live in, and close your front door, as it were, to have that privacy. And then at the same time, having that shared infrastructure. So in your case, places to grow, your water harvesting, all of those sorts of things.
And this building, actually, so this is a community space. We have a community building here, which my office is in here. And then, Debbie will be over there, and there's a workroom over there. And so there's an internal space as well, which is shared.
We probably don't have time, but I was thinking, that'll be interesting to talk about whether that was planned in at the beginning.
It was always planned in at the beginning, yes.
Great.
It was.
So we normally, at this stage in the recording, ask all of our guests, is there any kind of, learning that they have accumulated over the time that they would say was important things to share about, either setting up a community, maintaining communities, living in community? Are there any sort of key things that you've learned from your 30 years with Hockerton?
Well, as I said, meeting is critical. There's going to be ups and downs. There's always ups and downs, and finding your way and talking and communicating as much, I suppose, as you can, when you can. Taking the opportunities for communicating. And I think having good, strong outside links as well. The way people here, when they show people around, get a lot of motivation from doing that. Interestingly, so it's a two-way thing. People come, they see what we've done, they talk about it and engage. But people here like doing it because I suppose they're sort of not showing off, but getting appreciated, and that link with the outside world really is important. So keeping good internal and external communication going on.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for making the time to talk with us on the Diggers and Dreamers podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it's been of interest and interesting to people. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the go-to place for intentional communities in Britain. As ever, it really helps us if you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget, you can find out more about communal living at our website, diggersandreamers.org.uk. There you'll find an online directory of existing communities and developing groups within the UK, plus interactive notice boards and information about our publications. One you won't want to miss is the Diggers and Dreamers directory, which has been referred to as the Communard's Bible for 35 years. And now, to play us out, here are the Spaceheads with their tribute to our old mate, Gerard Winstanley. See you next time.